Okay, dokie. Thanks so many people for joining. That's fantastic. Tom Oddo from Goldspot Pens has joined us this evening, and he's going to be talking about how you can improve your handwriting using fountain pens and answer any questions that you might have. Tom and Goldspot always support the group at the Christmas auction and as well, which is fantastic. And tonight's sponsor is actually Diamine Ink, and they've given us £100 voucher for one of you to win this evening. So I'll make a note of everybody who's in the chat this evening, and I will then do a random number draw to find out who wins that, which will be fantastic. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Tom. Oh,
You'll have to unmute yourself
There we go.
first, Tom. Perfect.
Okay, that was good because I didn't start the best. So, hi everybody. This is Tom with Goldspot Pens, and I really appreciate the host Steph and Approval for inviting me to be on here. All of the FPUK admin and folks I've been talking to. It's just awesome to be part of this community that cares so much about the people in it, and that also like does awesome things with fountain pens and just our shared love of writing and using fountain pens. So one of the key aspects that I have often get asked a lot about, because as I write a lot of the social content for Goldspot, so any of the writing that you would see on Goldspot Pens Instagram, on YouTube, that's mostly me. So you'll see me write script and print and cursive and copperplate, flex nibs, stub nibs, and everything. So often I get a lot is like, Tom, you have beautiful handwriting, which is very humbling because I don't, consider myself like on the same level of other calligraphers and people that I see on Instagram. But it is very, it's a very humbling compliment that I take to heart, because like I know a lot of people look at me and want to say, I would love to have as nice handwriting as Tom does. So the topic of this conversation, of this, I guess, like little mini lecture that I'll have, is how to improve your handwriting with a fountain pen. So, we use fountain pens all the time, this whole group here. And, it's like, there could be varying degrees of like just how proficient that I guess we are in terms of like what we could actually do with it and make something beautiful, or just even make something that is legible. So so it definitely is something that I think improves as you use fountain pens, and that if you just spend enough time with it naturally, I feel that most people can start to improve their handwriting naturally. But I've come up with like a few things that we could touch on, kind of like a 3-step approach, I would say, for really if you want to kind of shortcut point A, which is my handwriting's not where I'd like it to be, to like my handwriting is so much better than I ever thought it could be. So it's a little cold in the office, so I have my like little fingerless gloves here. So it's about around freezing temperatures outside, and it's a little chilly. So like first of all, what I would start off with is just knowing what is good handwriting and what good handwriting looks like. And I think that's kind of like the step that a lot of people miss, is just like, my handwriting doesn't look good, like it doesn't look messy or whatever. But like, you have to understand what good handwriting looks like in order to really understand the concept of like, how could I improve my handwriting? And that's where you could kind of start to take notice as to what your handwriting what you can do to start fixing these little things here and there. So what is good? So think about like when you're reading, because I know a lot of us fountain pen enthusiasts are also avid readers as well. But even if you don't read books, you read online, you read comments on social media and things. When you read and you're looking at letters and you're putting these letters together in your mind and creating them into sentences and ideas, the clearer and the more consistent those letters are, the easier it is to read them. So one of the things that you would have to keep in mind is just things have to be aligned well. What I mean by aligned is that like your baseline of all of your letters, of all the bottoms of your letters, except for the descenders, like your like your P's and Q's. All of those letters should just be on an even line. I mean, that's why we have lined paper or graph paper or dot grid, is that we want to keep things in alignment so that way we could see each of the lines and all the sentences and all the words neatly arranged in a row. So, and then also too, is that you kind of have to be like somewhat of a typographist. In graphic design, there's such a thing called typography, which is the study of type. And there's a lot of nuances that are there in typography that you could apply to improving your handwriting, including like the space between the letters. So if you understand that like the space between the letters should probably be as uniform as possible, and that they're not crowding and they're not too widely spaced out, it's just make them as consistent as possible, and also keep attention to the slanting of the letters. So if you draw all of your downstrokes in the same angle, it's easy to read. But if you draw them at varying angles, if you draw one at like completely vertical and then the other one slanted, then it starts to look messy. It starts to look unclear. And that's really what the idea of like understanding what good handwriting looks like, is understanding how to make things as clear as possible for other people to read, or for yourself to read. Sometimes, I mean, like look at Da Vinci. Da Vinci wrote in his notebooks, and he wrote it so that way he was the only one that could read his notes. He wrote them like with I think with a mirror, or like so it would be kind of reversed and everything. So, but like when you're trying to write and improve your handwriting, you're trying to mostly improve it so it's a little bit more clear, a little bit more artful, that other people could then look at it and be like, oh, look, this looks great. You know, this looks very understandable, very readable. So really like that's the key elements, is understanding what does that look like. And you could then see what other examples are by looking up. You could find them in, of course, you could get books. And I mean, that's a lot of people say, it's like, what books should I get to see about improving my handwriting? And basically what a book would do, and you could do this by just even just doing some Google image searching, is just find an exemplar of like the entire alphabet in a particular font style. So whether it's copperplate cursive, or Palmer hand script, or just regular print letters, italic, black letter Gothic, you just want to have an example of how each of those letters presents themselves, and then understand, well, that I have to try to make them look like that. So, and then another thing that I think has been really helpful, especially in this modern age of social media, is looking at how other people accomplish the actual writing of the letters. So there's plenty of calligraphers online. I follow a whole bunch of them because they just are just mesmerizing for me to look at. And they also provide a lot of inspiration. So one particular that's popping in my head is Made by Edgar, is on all the different social channels. And he would just take you through like, okay, here, I'm taking a Pilot Parallel pen. I'm doing black letter Gothic A. I'm showing you step by step, stroke 1, this, stroke 2, that, stroke 3, this. So he like, there's calligraphers that will just take you step by step and show you in a video. And I think that's probably the most impactful way to learn. It's better than learning in a book, because you're actually seeing someone do it and seeing it being accomplished with an instrument that you could buy. It's a Pilot Parallel fountain pen, have plenty of them available at Goldspot. So it's just really, it does put everything together in a way that makes it easier for you to kind of pick this up and start going off with it, and being able to build on your skills. So I've taken it from my perspective. I look at certain way that people write things, and I'm like, ooh, I want to steal that uppercase cursive G that they just wrote. So then I'll just take a piece of paper and I'll just start writing it a bunch of times, and then just out of practice, it'll just get incorporated into the whole entire thing. So I'll see a certain way that somebody accomplishes a letter, either with like a flex nib or just a regular fountain pen nib, and I'll just basically be like, I'm just going to incorporate that into what I'm doing, and then just practice it and incorporate it. So, and that's what, like I said, that's the kind of like the next step. So it's like step 1 is like knowing what good handwriting looks like. Step 2 would be practicing that. And I think that's like this part that a lot of people get stumbled up on, is that practicing requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of repetition. But we all love using fountain pens. We all love collecting fountain pens. And one of the ways that you could best enjoy them is just use them at a good amount of time during the day. And knowing what you can do to make the most out of your time, I think, is important here. So you want to commit to writing, but not make it a chore. It's not like playing scales. I mean, some people love playing scales on a musical instrument, but like for me, anytime I try to learn a musical instrument, it was more instructive to me to try to like learn it in playing different songs. And I just found just playing the rote scales being pretty boring. So instead of like opening up a calligraphy book and then just being like doing an oval at a 45-degree slant like 100 times, I'd rather, let's say, sit there with my notebook open while the TV's on and just copy dialogue. That's like one of the fun things sometimes I do. If I have nothing else I could think of to write in my head, I would just like sit there with a notebook and I would just be listening to, let's say, my wife's watching a reality television show, and I'm just copying down some of the bits of dialogue that I would hear the characters going back and forth at each other. And it just would seem like this rather funny, non sequitur sort of banter conversation going on in my notebook. So, I mean, you could do other things though, like a lot of people do copy work, like they will take a book that they're reading and either take notes on it or just copy straight passages from it or just copy the book from front to back. And it's a beautiful way to be able to not only practice your handwriting, but also if you admire the person's writing style, the author's writing style, it then accomplishes twofold, is that you start to get the certain cadence and the word choices that the author uses, and it becomes so infused with your own writing that it's almost like a shortcut to like then understand how to write like author A, whoever your writing is. And then another really fun way to be able to practice is trying out different nibs. So if you're like myself or a lot of other pen collectors, you have a bunch of different pens, and these pens can sometimes have different nib styles on them. So they can have like broad or stub or flexible nibs, and it really does make it a lot more entertaining, a lot more fun to then switch things up and write with a different nib, even though it's completely different to the one that you usually use every day for like note taking. But like try something different, try something to just switch it up and make it fun. Another thing is, of course, like writing inspiring quotes, like also swatching all of your inks and cataloging them. That's one of my things, is that it just is like I love trying out different types of ink, and that's fun in itself. But then you kind of forget, it's like, well, did I really like that color? And like, how does this color compare to this other color I just bought? How these samples like compare, hue wise, shading wise, sheen. So I love just cataloging all of them, writing them down, putting them in like various notebooks, putting them on cards, in a journal and stuff, and just writing down the name of the ink, the color, the various characteristics of it, how much milliliters, and where it comes from, and what kind of properties it has, and just talk about that kind of stuff. Just find something to write about. And then also too is that because we are very technologically savvy, we could also do things that are fun and kind of talk to our personality of being a little anti-tech, and just handwriting, let's say, text messages, or handwriting social media posts and just posting them to people, or sending DMs to people, or posting in a group like the Fountain Pens UK group, and having a handwritten message to people, and then responding with handwritten messages to respond to the original post. So it's just this like kind of like an analog way to do something that you would do digitally. And then another thing that I think helps practice and helps reinforce a learning experience is accountability. So you're taking this journey alone, but you're not really alone. You can be with your group, your Fountain Pens UK group, or other various groups that you belong to, and post this stuff. Post a journey of like, this is where I'm starting day one. I'm trying to learn to do calligraphy better, or I'm trying to learn a particular style of calligraphy, and join me with me on this journey. And I'm just going to start from letter A and go through the whole entire alphabet, or I'm just going to write this, and then on day 30 I'm going to write it again and just see how it'll go. And then sharing that like either on the Facebook group or Reddit or Discord server, wherever that you like to hang out online and talk with other people that love handwriting and love fountain pens. There's plenty of people out there. And also too is on social media too. That's what kind of has been the way that holds myself accountable, is that when I'm posting for a group of people that are into fountain pens and appreciate handwriting and could have way better handwriting than I do, I need to at least be able to like have decent handwriting to like be able to post. I was like, oh, using a fountain pen, you know, post it on Goldspot Pens. And it's just like, if I had awful handwriting that you couldn't read, I think that would be kind of like if somebody were like trying to promote, let's say like an exercise gym, and they were not very well fit. So it's kind of would be, you know, it would be kind of like taking away from the product itself, you know. So it's like I have to have good handwriting. So I have to hold myself accountable to like have decent handwriting. And then also too is you get encouragement and inspiration from others in the group. If you do this journey publicly, if you try to improve your handwriting publicly, you'll find other people doing the same thing, and you kind of work together and you encourage each other, and then you get inspiration from those that, you know, might be further along in the journey than you are. So that's where accountability kind of also helps you, motivates you to move forward. And then the third step in this, so we had step one was knowing what good handwriting looks like. Step two is practicing it. And then step three, this fun part, is enhancing it through fountain pens. So that's what I mentioned before, is that you could, with fountain pens, you can make it fun by using various different types of nibs and flexible nibs, or like stub nibs, architect, needlepoint. But really what that is meant to do is that you want to find something that will really work with what you have naturally. So it's like some people just, no matter what, how many flex nibs that they try, is just flex nib writing isn't for them. They just can't really get to using it. They just can't sit down and have the patience with it. And that's fine. I mean, like, I love using them, and I've used them quite often. I've used a whole bunch of different ones, like the 912 or the Scribos or the Magna Carta and things. I love just using and trying out all the different flex nibs. I like writing with a flex nib style, although it's not practical for, let's say, everyday note taking or like my journaling that I usually do. It's fun for like doing, let's say, headers, or if I'm like writing a note to somebody, writing out a card. That the additional line variation of being able to push on the nib and then give it that little bit of flex just adds so much more dimension. And that's what I mean, like it enhances what you're already doing that you couldn't do with just like, let's say, a regular ballpoint pen, or just a regular, let's say, fine nib fountain pen. So it adds that little extra layer. And then something you could also do besides flex nibs is also stub nibs or italic nibs, is that they add that additional dimension of line variability just by the nature of the shape of the nib. So all you're doing is just pulling the nib down across that broader edge. You're getting a broad stroke, but then as you go horizontally, you're getting a very thin line. So then if you were, let's say, practicing an italic type print, then a stub nib would be a way to enhance that, because it would make it look so much more like the font style or the handwriting style that you're going for, but you're not having to, like, you know, really worry about like, oh, this broad edge right here is like, it's already kind of made for that purpose. So that's really what kind of adds that little bit of additional flair and dimension to your writing, is just finding a good nib that works well with what you're trying to accomplish. And then on top of that, the fun things you could do, especially with diamine ink, is you'd be able to like enhance what the color and the depth of the color, and if it has sheen or shading or shimmer. And ink is that kind of that X factor that really brings out, even if it's not quite the best looking handwriting, if you're doing it in a shimmer ink, it just always looks a lot more glamorous, you know, just right off the bat, just because it has shimmer ink on it. So it's like you'd be able to kind of like put that in front of somebody who doesn't really know what it is that you're doing here, and they would just automatically, it would just be very impressive because it just has that shimmering, you know, look about the handwriting. So it's kind of like a little bit of a shortcut to being like, hey, you want to see impressive handwriting? Check this out. You know, seeing that shimmer on the page and everything. So, but that does, it adds, I feel, a little bit more of an enhancement, especially you see some of the calligraphers too, is that they're not just usually working with just standard blue ink. And I've mentioned Made by Edgar before, and he sometimes uses some crazy inks. He's even used like the scratch paper, the black paper, where you scratch it with a nib and it kind of it reveals like a rainbow metallic underneath it. So it's like, it's not color changing ink or anything. It's just like a special type of paper. And really that's just what I'm just kind of getting at, is that like doing something different with ink, whether it be with a sheen or shimmer or shading ink that looks really impressive on paper, can also enhance the overall look of your handwriting to make it look a lot, you know, nicer than it would be normally. So but that's my 3-step approach. And I feel like I just wanted to kind of go over just doing a little bit of like a monologue session and then kind of open it up to questions, because I know people will have undoubtedly have some questions to ask. So but that's my spiel, so there you go.
No, that's fantastic.
I
Thank
have
you
a
very
question.
much.
Sure.
So, paper. So, what paper do you normally would recommend for, like, or what do you like using? Because everybody knows the Tomoe River paper. Everybody knows like kind of the papers that we have available for practicing purposes. Is there a paper
Well,
you would recommend?
I love Tomoe River. I also have I don't know if anybody had recognized in the back there, I got my little cubby that I usually shoot videos into, but I usually use a Rhodia 80 GSM paper, and that's what I like to do a lot of like sample writing on. So I feel that this is kind of like a really good general purpose type of paper that's also somewhat like reasonably priced compared to other options like a Tomoe River. But I do love Tomoe River. It's like one of my favorite papers. But I usually like the 68 GSMs that they used to make before the switch over to the Sanzen papers. It's getting harder and harder to find them, but I like using that. Yeah, but that's usually my go-to. Clairefontaine is really good as well, but they use similar, you know, they use the same type of paper anyway. But yeah, that's usually what I would.
And do you change the paper depending on the pen you're using?
Not so much, really. No, I don't
Okay.
really find myself doing that. Like I usually will stay pretty consistent on the paper. It may change based on, like, let's say if I really was going on, if I knew let's say I was going with a very broad, like a super broad nib, like a triple broad, or a flex nib, or a like just a very wide stub, like I might want to not do because like Rhodia kind of has a little bit of a limitation, and I don't want to necessarily, like, you know, have too much of that feathering and bleeding and stuff like that. So like I would then maybe be on the safer side, just do Tomoe River for that.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the Rhodia, it can be coated and with really juicy nibs. Yeah. Sorry. What is your everyday carry and what nib does it have?
Right now I have 4 pens I have on me. I have a roster usually of like 10 different pens that's kind of like part of my nicest pen collection that I have. But like right now I have inks. I have 4 different pens. I have a vintage Parker Vacuumatic.
Lovely.
It's a fine point. I used to have a whole bunch of these, but then I realized I didn't have to have them in all the colors. But so I kind of just thinned it down to just the one blue one that's my favorite. So this one's just nice because it is a little bit on the smaller side. Let's take the glove off so that you guys could see. It's a bit on the smaller side for my hand, but I kind of like it for that reason, because the other pens I have are larger. So another smaller pen that I have is the Kabeco Sport. I do like this a lot. And I like to put shimmer inks in it because I can take apart the converter and pull out the nib and feed. And this has a broad nib on it so that I could see more of the shimmer ink out of the pen. Then I have a Mont Blanc 146, and this has been Bokumundoized by Bokumondo. So it's got the urushi and the rodden. This has a broad nib as well. It's kind of a stubby broad. I do enjoy the smoothness of that one. And then last but not least, I have a Leonardo Momento Zero Grande 2.0 in the primary manipulation, and it's got a broad steel nib on it. So that is what I have currently with me today.
But you do lean towards a broader nib?
For this group, yeah, it's been more like that. And it's funny because I had started out, my first like pen that I purchased at Goldspot was a Lamy Safari in an extra fine. So it's like now I've gone from like extra fine to broad and stubs and flex. And I do have like, I don't think you could count it though. Well, actually, this is this Parker is a fine point. So this is like the one lone fine point of the group. But the other pens that I have, they're all over the place. So like, but usually I tend not to do any extra fines just because I want to be able to see more of the ink color on the paper.
So PJ has commented rather than asked a question to say that she struggles and she still needs to grasp the concept of not having the pens in all the colours, and I'd agree with that as well. What font exemplar do you recommend for easy improvement of awful handwriting?
I don't have anything particular to look at in terms of anything to point to. I'm trying to think if there's something. Nothing in particular, but like what I would probably do is I would just search. If you want to just like get a really basic handwriting style, I would just search maybe like on Google, let's say a Palmer method, just when doing cursive. But if you want to just do like a print style, even if you look at, let's say, like what the Arial font looks like, even just looking at something like that, or just something that you could just get a basic idea of like the shapes and the constitution of the letters, and then just look at the images on Google, because like Google will have like, you could just search it up and then just see like the whole entire alphabet and how each of the letters looks like. It's it's not anything specific per se, and that's why I kind of think that at the same time, like I don't want to lead and say something specific just because, like, in order for you to be interested in being able to practice it, I feel like you have to find something that is speaks to you somehow. So if like a sans serif sort of typeface, if you want to do like a typewriter font, you look up like a vintage typewriter font and just basically copy how those letters are, including the little serifs and the way that the various letters look, and just copy them from A to Z.
Yeah, that's something I keep meaning to do. I really love the look of that with the fountain pen. Paul asks, is a wetter ink nib combo always better, or are there times when you prefer a drier ink?
My personal preference is I like wetter. Wetter is better for me. I also like smoother nibs, and I know that tends to be a matter of preference, because a lot of people, especially people who love sailor nibs, want more feedback and could probably use a drier, like they like a little bit of a drier experience where they could feel the nib on the paper and they could also control the line width more strictly, especially if they're writing very, very small letters. But I like writing a little bit on the bigger side. I like seeing more ink on the paper. So I like that wetter experience. And of course, like with Tomoe River too, is that you have the smoother paper quality too. So I just like a super smoothness, which I think that's kind of just a matter of preference one way or another. So if it's, for me personally, like I would want to, let's say, go with a drier ink if I am writing with a pen that has like a wet flow. So for example, maybe like, maybe like the Mont Blanc is a bit of a wet flow type of pen, and the 146 I have is a broad, and it's a pretty juicy one at that. So so if I want to like dial that back in, I might want to throw in a drier type of ink in there, just so that way it's not way too much like a fire hose, and I'm having to blot the pages as I'm going on and writing.
Fantastic. What flex nibs would you recommend for a beginner?
That is a question I get a lot, and it's a hard question to answer because there are options at the inexpensive end of things, and as I have found, I think especially with beginning writing with flex nibs, is that they have to be a bit more forgiving, and I don't really feel like the inexpensive options really give you like a good sense of what flex nibs can really achieve. And I mean, like, there are some that you could play around with and that kind of work well enough, but I mean, it's very difficult to find something that I think has that flexibility that you could expect, and that ability to get the line variation really nicely on the page, and then while having that nice snapback and just working like it's supposed to, while being able to keep up with the ink flow and everything. So, like, I would probably say, and this isn't going to be, this kind of probably cut counter to talking about fountain pens, but I would probably say trying out a dip pen first, as like your first like step for flex nibs, because to be able to get that idea of like being able to flex, if you had, let's say, the Browse, the steno nib, the blue pumpkin nib, that on a dip pen holder, if you just bought those two things together, is like maybe like it's like under $5 or say $5 or something. It would be very inexpensive, I think, to kind of go in on that. And I think especially if you're just kind of trying it out at first, and you just want to see if how you could potentially use a flex nib and kind of get used to it a little bit. There's just the writing mannerisms and kind of the flow of how things work. Is that I feel like that's a good step to kind of try it out, just the actual writing aspect of it. And then to kind of build on that and to work towards another, to being able to use it with a fountain pen, I usually would go with like the Pilot Falcon, or I think the Labo, as they call it in internationally as well, or that's at least in Japan, I think. But the Falcon, it doesn't have the widest flex. Like, if you wanted to get a Pilot that had better flex, you could go with the custom 912. That's significantly more expensive. But I think it has just enough that it gives you a good experience of being able to add that line variation with your handwriting, and also it has like different nib sizes available too. So if you wanted to go with the extra fine, or if you wanted to go with something a little bit smoother, a little bit more broader, there's also, I think, medium, and it goes up to broad, if I'm not mistaken. But they have different nib sizes, but they all flex. So you could. Oh wow, that's just odd. There's a little bit of a topple in my office. So if you heard that, but everything's good. It was just random stuff that just fell. No one injured. But yeah, the flex, I think, on the Falcon is a pretty decent enough that you kind of get like a good idea of like, then do I want to step it, even take it another level up? And I would say, like, if you were really going up the ladder of like flexibility, then you have things like the Magna Carta, the 14 karat flex on that pen, which is a relatively new thing that constantly is improving that flex that's there, or like Scribo's Feel the Flex, the 14 karat gold nib that's there. That's a beautiful flex nib. So I have both in my collection, which I don't have with me today, but I have both. I have a custom 823 that was has the FA nib on it, which is something you get. I think you have to get it from Japan. Then I also have the Scribo Feel the Flex 14 karat gold nib. And also too is I have a nib unit for the Ralph Reyes cross flex nib, which, believe it or not, is made out of stainless steel, and it is like flexes even better than those nibs combined. Yeah. It's just amazing that stainless steel could do that. But that's like the only kind of like the outlier of the stainless steel nibs that can just flex really well. Because usually if you get with, let's say, an Omniflex or like the Noodler's Flex. It's just they require so much hand pressure to force the nib tines to open and to get that line variation that I just feel it's not. It like would tire me out, like having to do that, and it really doesn't add that much of a flair to the handwriting as you would with one of those other options that I was speaking of. But like if you want to go with something just to try it out and give it a shot, just the actual handwriting aspect of it, I would try the dip pen route, because you know you'd be able to get like a good idea of like whether or not you want to try doing this more often, and if you could, you know, work on your handwriting that way, and then be able to, you know, buy something a little bit more expensive later on that can hold its own ink.
I'm going to skip a couple of questions and come back to them, because Chris has asked, on the subject of flex nibs, what tips do you have for a left-handed underwriter who
Okay.
enjoys using flex nibs but can struggle at times to, sorry, something's over the thing. It's flexing the opposite way to right-handed people, basically.
That's tough because I am right-handed, so I don't have that much advice I could give for lefties. And also too is that my dad's into fountain pens and he is a lefty, so he could speak to his knowledge about how he operates with using a fountain pen. But his thing is that he doesn't like flex nibs, and I think that's probably the reason why, is that it really is because you're putting so much ink on the page, especially as you're flexing. It does not. It's not. It requires having to pull down in order to get that nib to flex. So you kind of do have to write under to do do underwriting. You can't kind of do the overhook, you know, or like writing on the side, because it just won't. You know, you'll be running over your, you know, the ink all the time. So it is really tricky, and you know, if somebody comes up with a great solution, you know, to like do a video on it, like I am all down for like showing that to a lot of people, because I think that especially for lefties, I feel like kind of sometimes will put themselves out of the conversation of even trying fountain pens, because they're like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, like there's no fountain pen for a left-hander, or like I can't use fountain pens because I'm left-handed. It's like, no, you can. You just have to kind of like make it work for you. You know, it's like just you kind of have to figure out some way.
You might have to speak to Approver, because she's the left
So
underwriter.
I can demonstrate. I
Awesome.
messaged Chris back. I am a left-handed underwriter and I can use flex nibs. I love using flex nibs, and it's probably like the biggest majority of my a very curated collection now is flex nibs. And the first advice I can give you without hijacking your call is the way you hold, like where you have your paper on the table. So I feel like whenever I'm putting my notebook on the table, you have to figure out how to angle the paper the way you hold your pen. Like that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you. I can show you.
Shall we do that after Tom's?
We can do that. Yes. But
I would love to. I would love to actually see what Approval's going to do.
If you're okay, then yeah, carry on. Sorry.
I would love to see like a demonstration if she could.
Yeah. I can do it. I can do it later. There are a list of questions, so let's get the questions done first, and then if you want to hang out with us, I can show you. But essentially, the first piece of advice is like with right-handedness, because the paper can stay straight or at an angle, you move your hand away from the paper. But with the left-handed side, especially when you write on the left-hand side of the paper, I see myself moving the notebook or the paper that I'm using more than my hand. So that would be the first thing. But let's go through the questions first, and then I can show you. I would love to show you. Not that I like showing off or anything, but
Jack says that he always holds the pen quite at quite a high angle. Do you think it's better to try and hold it at a more shallow angle to improve your writing?
I feel, especially with fountain pens, I think a majority of them work better with a more acute angle to the page. I know some of them are engineered. Let's say if you were using a naginata togi or certain other nib styles with a specific grind that actually utilize more of the perpendicular writing stance. Those are kind of meant to get like the finest line out of the possible line widths of that particular nib style. But I've kind of found like the sweet spot and what the manufacturers are kind of engineering their pens for, and designing their nibs and or making sure that their nibs are working, I think at like an angle of at least maybe like 55 to like 40 degrees. With that being said, it does like vary based on the manufacturer of the nib, and like if the nib itself could also not be properly attuned. But that's where maybe like if you wanted to, you could go down the route of going to, let's say, a pen show, or sending your pen to a nib meister to then maybe accommodate for that fact that you do hold your pen more at a perpendicular angle, and like to make it a little bit like whichever way that you'd want to go with it. Because if you wanted to go with it being a little bit more smoother or like a little bit more responsive when you're writing with it at a perpendicular angle, that's what I'm saying, is that it doesn't, like, I think most of the manufacturers are making their nibs based on the idea that like people are going to hold it at like more of an acute angle than being straight up.
That makes sense. And Liz asks, any thought on using a writing slope rather than a surface, a flat surface?
Oh, to have it at like a raised angle, like a drafting board almost.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what in general, like back in my days of like I had first been introduced to like at least to nibs back when I was like a teenager, and I would used to do a lot of comic art, and I had a table that was at a slant. So I had like it's like a illustrator's type of table, or like a draftsperson sort of table, and it had an angle to it. And I always found working on that was kind of, it still didn't feel right to me. So maybe like I would say try possibly, because you could get like, let's say one of those wooden setups where you could put the book or whatever you're writing on an angle, kind of like one of those ones that would hold a book apart, and you could just kind of then just write on it, and you could adjust the angle of it. You try that, see if maybe there's like a like a particular angle that just works best with you. But like in general, I've been writing on like flat surfaces, and I so occasionally, let's say if I'm in bed, like I'll like be writing, but then I'll write on my lap, or like like I'll put the pillow on top and I'll be writing on the pillow. Like I just kind of, I don't really give that much thought to the actual surface itself, but it is very interesting to think about it. But I would probably try something that you could adjust the angle of the writing surface and see if that might be more comfortable, or could improve. But like I know that most of the time when I'm writing in the wild, so to speak, I'm just kind of having to deal with whatever desk or whatever it is that I have on my or sometimes I'll just be carrying my notebook around. I'll just be writing things as I'm walking around the office or something like that. But yeah, that's it's good to consider though. Like I think it would be interesting to try that out, and maybe even like get something together where it's like the desk has like a way to prop up your notebook, and then you'd have like little drawers for various let's say inks or little accessories like blotting paper and things like that. Would be pretty cool.
It would. Do you write with your paper at an angle, or is the paper always perpendicular to you?
I would probably say
only have a little bit. 90% of it is fonts.
The people that walked in darkness.
So like I would probably turn like at an angle.
Yeah.
I think I have it naturally kind of like so that
Upon them hath the light shined.
maybe like at this like kind of like at a slight angle, just so that I could kind of feel a little bit more natural as my arm kind of. So yeah. So I wouldn't be at perpendicular. I would definitely be like at an angle. Yeah, and that's usually what I have to do for videos too. Is I have to kind of keep in mind where the camera is, and then kind of go around it, so that way I'm not it has to kind of be in between me and the writing surface.
It
So I have to kind of
says-
get around and do it that way.
Sorry, somebody. Tom Sherwood, I just want to say thanks to Tom for one of his videos where he used Arushu inks, Arushizuku ink, sorry. I can't pronounce it. Amairo. That video single-handedly made me fall in love with that ink and bright sky blue inks in general. There may also have been a similar video of his that did the same of Sailor Manyo summary too. Either way, I saw Tom's videos early in my Facebook Fountain Pen journey, and they certainly had an impact on me. So no question.
Thank you, Tom. it's Tom's are. I usually find that I get along very well with Tom. So thank you, Tom.
My question, I had a couple of questions. The first one is that you obviously enjoy ink very much, which is my particular passion, and so I wondered what your favorite ink was.
I love Tasha, the TACCIA,
Yeah.
the Hokusai Saibi Midori is like one of my favorites that I was just like, this is really, really underappreciated. It's like, I know like Pilot Ear Shizuku is like a great ink collection. And I think, it's one of the most popular colors ever is like Konpeki. Like people love Konpeki. Like it's just, it's standard across the board. But I love finding inks that are not as thoroughly appreciated, but still have like wondrous qualities about them. And Saibi Midori has it goes on blue, like so when it's wet, it's kind of like this really deep looking blue, and then as it dries, it turns into a rust colored green with sheen. And it's just such a wild color that I was just like, I have to. And there's not really that reliable supply of them because Tasha is not really known as like a fountain pen ink company, so we tend to see the stock of it kind of come and go. So it would be like times when like the stock of it's not available. I stumbled across a really nice one just recently, the Jacques Herbin Tour Eiffel, which is a really nice brown caramel color, warm brown that has deep shading, and it's a really nice, like it's got like such a nice like vintage cozy vibe about it. It looks great with flex nibs too, because like the ink cools really nicely. And I also love, like, one of my first inks that I had bought a bottle of was Sailor in the Souten, Souten, and that's a nice brilliant blue ink, and it's got that nice pink sheen, but it's not too much sheen. It's not overwhelming amounts of sheen. It's not sheen that will cause your pen to get a little dry and everything. It just has just enough of everything that I enjoy using it. One of the inks I love using for testing, especially with like if we're doing usually with Goldspot videos, is I'll use Waterman, and this is a super simple Serenity Blue.
Yeah.
Super simple ink, and it just cleans so nice with pens. And that's one of the elements that I love about that is like one of those unseen parts about fountain pen inks is like, well, it looks great. It's like as a glitter ink or sheen ink or whatever. Oh, it looks great. It's a nightmare to clean out of the pen. Like, so like, let's say Bay State Blue or like one of the super shimmery Ferris wheel inks. But like Waterman's Serenity Blue is just like, it's so easy to clean out of a pen. Even like a demonstrator, it just cleans right out. No like mess left behind. Usually if you get to it quick enough, and that's what I would recommend is with any ink, is that if you're using it for, however much time that you're using it for, as soon as it's kind of at its end, if it's starting to give you a little bit of trouble and you maybe have like just a little bit of residue left in the pen, just wash it out, put like another ink color or refill it again. That way you just constantly keep it not, you don't let it have a chance to sit there forever and ever and let it crust over and get so saturated in the pen.
Fantastic. And I don't have any of those three, so that's excellent news. I have a lot of ink, but none of those.
You do have a lot of ink.
Do you recommend using Say's ruled paper when trying to improve handwriting?
I think it's a good paper to use. And if you use it for, especially what we were talking about with trying to keep the alignment, especially with ascenders, descenders, with the stems of the lettering, so P's, Q's, D's, T's, like the very, the extended parts of the lettering, it would help with that aspect, because then you're being very exact with the heights of everything and the sizes of all of the letters with the French ruled paper. So that Claire Fontaine makes a notebook with that type of paper. That ruling is super exact, and I kind of feel like that paper is very intimidating for me when I look at it. My personal thing is I like look at it, I'm like, I know I have good handwriting, but I don't think I'll ever have that great handwriting that's going to be like super, super precise. Like, I don't mind kind of having a little bit of variability in my sizes of like how far up and down things go. I mean, if you look at modern calligraphy in general too, this maybe gives you a little bit more comfort to know, like when you look at modern calligraphy, you look at, let's say, invitations, or like if you look at a wedding, the script that they use for like wedding things, like and baby announcements and things like that, the really super bouncy looking script is totally in these days. And if you give somebody who does that type of script like the French ruled paper, they're gonna be like, I don't use this, what are you talking about? It's like the way that the letters just kind of go up and down and follow this kind of like rhythmic wave, that type of paper would not like be suitable for that. It's just kind of more free form, and that's what I was saying is like it gives you a little bit more permission to be a little bit more to interpret handwriting a little bit more and make it fancier for yourself. But if you're trying to like get it so that you could get, if you're trying to get your handwriting down to like, making it neater and more regimented and cleaner in terms of like the sizing and the shapes and the spacing, then I think the French ruled paper is pretty good for that purpose. But also too, so you could easily use grid paper for that as well. But it just depends on like, I think what your overall achievement is. You could pair the French ruled paper with like, let's say a book, or looking at an exemplar of the Spencerian type of writing, and you could go to town with that. You could go that route. But if you wanted to be a little bit more casual about it, something like a dot grid paper would be fine. So I have dot grid paper I like using because it's less obstructive with the amount of ink that's already on the paper with the guides and everything. But you could easily use that. You can easily use gridded paper. Plenty of different options out there, and just see what works, see what would make you adhere more to improving your handwriting.
Fantastic. And when did you start using fountain pens?
Exclusively when I had started working at Goldspot, I think it was about 17 years ago. The most experience I had with it was, like I said, was when I was a teenager and I was playing around with dip nibs and doing comic book pages and comic book illustrations, just dipping it in a bottle of Higgins ink and spraying ink everywhere, because I didn't realize that you really shouldn't be pressing down on a nib when you're going like side to side. So like the tines get like overlap with each other and then just start flicking ink everywhere. But then I thought it was cool because I'm like, oh, look, it's a cool little ink spray that kind of adds a little extra texture to the image. But outside of that, I'd known that nice pens exist. I liked going to the stationery store, which we have Staples, is the big office supply store by us, and I loved going back to school shopping. And my nicest pen at the time when I was in grade school was like a Pilot Dr. Grip, and I thought that was an indulgence at that point, because it's like, oh, everybody else is just writing with anything that they could just get their hands on, disposable or otherwise. But I had gotten to the point where I gave myself a callus on my middle finger from holding wood case pencils so much that I felt the Dr. Grip was going to help with not, giving myself that callus anymore, because it was a really big raised bump that was on my finger. But I mean, it cut a little bit, but it what really helped was getting introduced to fountain pens. But that was much later. Like I said, 17 years ago, joining Goldspot, and then understanding that fountain pens existed, and that I wasn't in for this splattery experience that I had when I was younger. So when I started to then introduce to like the Safari and everything, I was like, oh, this is nice. This is something else. Like I don't have to put that much pressure on it, and I could do all sorts of different colors of ink, and I could switch my nib to a whole bunch of different sizes and everything. So that's really where it took hold, and I was sold on it. I was like, this is amazing. From like my earlier years when I was introduced to a lot of different materials in terms of like being creative, I saw fountain pens later on, and I'm like, I wish I was introduced to this a lot earlier. I would have been a full-blown pen addict even way before I even started working at Goldspot. So
Ross says she has a dent in the side of her left middle finger from school days decades ago, and I have a misshaped nail from actually from a Schaefer no nonsense mine was from, but luckily it got replaced with the Parker 25, and I fell in love with fountain pens. So okay, do we have any more questions before we tie this element up? I'll just give a second to see if anybody else wants to either jump in or pop something in the chat.
I did see from Juliet wrote, with flex nibs, do you find it easier to have a softer
sorry, I missed
surface beneath your writing sheet? And I really don't, as long as there's paper left in either my notebook or in, let's say, a notepad, I think that it feels good. I really don't like writing when I have just a single sheet of paper. Let's say if I was writing a single sheet of paper and then I had the desk right underneath it. I do like having something underneath. So I would say definitely, like, especially if you're pressing with the flex nib, is I would definitely put something underneath it. Maybe just having like a stack, like a note this, or like a notebook out. So if you had like a single sheet of paper and you were writing something with a flex nib on it, take out a whole other notebook, go to let's say a blank page on the one side that's like the thicker side, and just put the paper over it, just so you can have something underneath it that will give a little bit, because that does bother me. I don't like having like a single sheet of paper and then just writing on like a hard surface that's underneath. I like having some papers that are underneath it, which usually if you have a notebook or a notepad and you're not on the last sheet of paper, you'll have something that at least kind of gives a little bit of give.
Fantastic. Cool. Any more questions? Okay. The number generator, I've also made notes. I've written I wrote everybody's names down, and the number generator is 32, which is the lovely Louise Brooks. So if you want to drop me a message, Louise, I will get you in touch with DieMine for your prize. Lots of thank yous coming through. And on that note, do you want to end the recording and then we'll have a look at the flexi stuff?
Yeah, no problem. Stop recording.